There have been plenty of undeserved title shots throughout the history of the UFC, but it seems like in recent years there have been a surplus of just these like odd matchups where it seems like the UFC is trying to really just push someone into that opportunity, either to promote someone who hasn't earned the shot or to prevent someone else that they don't want to get that opportunity to potentially win the belt. I think we're getting one of those fights this weekend with the rematch between Merab and Sean O'Malley. There's one rumored for UFC 320 with a potential Volk Yair rematch, which would just be insane from like a merit perspective. And so in this video, I'm going to be running through all the recent examples of some of these just like forced, undeserved title shots, and then just kind of touch on why I do think this is a pretty big problem here for the UFC. Before I jump into the first one here, I want to say I'm not going to be including title fights that came together because of injuries. So like JDM Bilal. Was JDM super deserving of a title shot? No, but Shavkat was injured. So Shavkat couldn't get that opportunity. They go to JDM. Same thing with like a Moicano, Islam Makhachev title fight, whatever. And then also divisions that are just picked through. Like I'm not going to be talking about Pantoja Urseg, because even though Urseg didn't have a great resume, like Pantoja had pretty much beaten every other top fighter in the flyweight division. So examples like that will not be touched on. But let's just start off with this Merab Sean O'Malley fight that we're going to be getting at UFC 316. This one, in my opinion, is just pretty indefensible from the UFC. Sean O'Malley is getting an immediate rematch for this, title fight that he lost against Merab. And, there's a few different reasons why someone could get a rematch. One is that it's a super competitive fight where like it could have gone either way, so you want to see it again. Another one is that it was just a super entertaining fight, so it's like, let's just give the fans another one of those. And then another one is if a champion has been, a long reigning champ and they've racked up a ton of title defenses and, you just think they kind of deserve that opportunity at the rematch. Those are really like the reasons why someone would get a second crack. Sean O'Malley checks none of those boxes, and that fight didn't check any of those boxes. It was a clear decision win for Merab, even though it was 3 rounds to 2. I thought it was 48-47. It was much closer to being like a 49-46 Merab than it was to being a 48-47 for O'Malley. It was not an entertaining fight. I'd say it was pretty boring. It was kind of a clunker way to end that Sphere card. You had like the last two matchups of like the Valentina super wrestling heavy game plan and then this Merab O'Malley fight. Like that card did not end on a bang at all. And then O'Malley's not a long reigning champion. He had one title win and it was pretty much gifted to him in actually a fight I'm going to be touching on later on in this video. And so I guess if you could make the argument, it would be like, there wasn't a super deserving next option. I would disagree. I think you could have gone with Petr Yan. I know the first fight wasn't competitive, but he had back-to-back wins against Song Yadong and Davison Figueiredo. You also could have preemptively, made a potential matchup here for a number one contender fight where Corey Sandhagen was calling for the opportunity to fight Sean O'Malley. If Sean O'Malley went out there and beat Corey Sandhagen and then got this opportunity again, I wouldn't be salty about it. I would have said he probably deserved it. And then if Corey Sandhagen beats Sean O'Malley, you have another interesting matchup for someone who actually deserved that title shot. So like if that's the argument, like the UFC set that up to be the case, right? Like if they didn't want to give it to Merab, even if he beat Figgy, then it was just like, all right, we're just going to wait it out and give Sean O'Malley this opportunity. I mean, this might be crazy. I would have preferred to see Patchy Mix take on Merab this weekend, similar to what they did with Kai Asakura. Like I know he hasn't earned it from a UFC perspective, but like dominant champion in another organization. I think stylistically, it's an interesting matchup. And then potentially the craziest thing about all of this is that it's an immediate rematch for Sean O'Malley, but the champion, the guy who won the fight, had to go and have another tough title defense against, someone who probably beats O'Malley in Umar Nurmagomedov. So, I mean, it's clearly special treatment here for O'Malley. He got pushed into the title shot originally. Obviously, he had to win some fights to get there. Close fight against Petr Yan, great performance against Aljamain Sterling, but there's no way you can explain this aside from him just getting special treatment from the UFC, and I do think it's a pretty undeserved title shot. I will say, I have picked Sean O'Malley to win this fight. Like, I don't think he's just going to get run through in this matchup, but even though I'm picking him, I can also acknowledge that he does not deserve this opportunity to get the belt again. Then we're going to move over to a couple of DDP fights. So we've had the back-to-back title defenses for DDP, the first one against Israel Adesanya, and then the second one against Sean Strickland, the Sean Strickland rematch. And I will say that I don't think both of these were undeserved. Actually, I will say I think both of them were undeserved, but I think one of them the UFC needed to make, right? That first DDP title defense, the options were, do you give it to Izzy, who had lost his last fight? It was a title shot, but like he was coming off a loss. Or do you give it to Sean Strickland, like in an immediate rematch? And so like neither option was great, right? But they end up going with Israel Adesanya. But after you've made that call, in my opinion, you then need to go out there and make a number one contender fight. You don't want Sean Strickland to pick up one win against Paulo Costa. Maybe he was coming off that Costa decision win, but like not a super impressive performance. It was a boring fight. Once you decide that you're not going with Sean Strickland, having him just like wait in this line for a title shot when first off, Sean Strickland is not a fun fighter to watch. He didn't have a great resume leading up to his first title shot. He got the title shot because the UFC messed up their scheduling, right? And they made DDP Whitaker too close to when they needed Izzy to fight. That's a fight I could honestly put on here also, the first Izzy Strickland fight, but it's because they messed up their scheduling. And so Strickland got that opportunity. But so I think after you make the call for Izzy, fine, you could have gone with either of those dudes for DDP's first title defense, but then you have to put Strickland in another fight because now you have him just sitting on his spot, waiting in line for the title shot. Khamzat Chimaev, who hasn't been able to get a lot of momentum because he pulls out of fights, he's having trouble missing weight, all of this stuff. He picks up a super impressive, dominant win against Robert Whitaker. And now he has to sit on the sideline because he's waiting for Sean Strickland to get his title shot, coming off a one-fight win streak against Paulo Costa, wasn't a reigning champion, and then goes out and has a disappointing fight against DDP. And we could have been seeing that Khamzat Chimaev matchup, much earlier. Now we're getting that like later this year. So I just think it was bad matchmaking. I think one of those dudes could have gotten that first one. But when you go to the second one, when you just start letting dudes wait in line, especially when they're not deserving, that's when you start to run into some problems. I will say before I move into this next one, I'm going to skip past the Pantoja-Asakura fight. Like, I guess you could consider that here, but once again, just scarcity of challengers. It's not like there was an amazing option that they could have gone with over Kai Asakura. So now we are going to go to the Jon Jones-Stipe Miocic fight. This one honestly might have me fired up more than any other one here in this video because this specific fight and the way the UFC have handled Jon Jones up at heavyweight, it has turned the heavyweight division into an absolute disaster. This is supposed to be like the most entertaining, the biggest, the baddest fights, and we're just not getting any fights here because the UFC have put all their eggs into the Jon Jones basket. And shocker, he's unreliable. You can't count on him, and it's blowing up in their face here. So Stipe Miocic got this title opportunity coming off a brutal knockout loss to Francis Ngannou 3.5 years earlier. The man was 42 years old. And now I could potentially understand the initial booking, right? I think it was it November of 2023? Was it that long ago? But it was like the initial booking where Sergey was the backup, even though Sergey should have been getting the title shot. Sergey was the backup. Jon Jones has to pull out. They don't keep Stipe on the card, which I think is already whack. And they have Tom Aspinall step in on short notice for an interim title fight against Sergey Pavlovich. In my opinion, once Tom Aspinall wins that fight, that Stipe Miocic-Jon Jones fight just has to be scrapped. You have to move on. The fact that they chose the corpse of Stipe Miocic to fight Jon Jones over Tom Aspinall, who is the defending interim champion, 8 UFC wins, all finishes, 7 of them in round 1. It was a complete disaster decision from the UFC, and they are still paying for it today. Like, if they tried to make that Jon Jones Tom Aspinall fight, and like Jon Jones was super resistant, didn't want to do it, then you kind of would have had your answer that like, all right, this is not going to work out. We have to let this heavyweight division move on. Instead, you just like feed him this easy matchup where he can, just go on and on about how it's a legacy fight and he has to like defend Stipe being like a real challenger when he just looked like a complete shell of himself. And now they're still letting Jon Jones just sit on the belt. Like, this is truly one of the worst decisions the UFC has made in a very, very long time. And so Jon Jones-Stipe, this fight, when it was originally made, fine. The rematch or the rebooking never should have been a thing. Tom Aspinall's really been screwed over in this whole situation. So just a real disaster all around here. And then we're going to go down one weight class to light heavyweight, where we have Alex Pereira taking on Khalil Roundtree. And within the next few, I think there are 4 left in this video, there's kind of a theme where the UFC is almost like attempting to prevent certain guys from getting title shots, where they just make them work extra hard to get to the belt or get that opportunity. I think Movsar is kind of going through that right now if they do make that Yair Volk fight for UFC 320. But as we're going to see with these next few, it just doesn't really work. Khalil Roundtree at the time was on a 5-fight win streak, his signature win being a KO win against Anthony Smith. Now, stylistically, this was a super fun fight. It ended up delivering, but they bypassed Magomed Ankalaev, who was on a 12-fight unbeaten streak, also had a knockout win against Anthony Smith, also was coming off a KO win against Johnny Walker. Magomed ends up picking a win against Rakic, still ends up getting to the belt, and, kind of what the UFC, I guess, was trying to avoid. He ends up beating Alex Pereira and taking that light heavyweight title. Then we're going to have Islam Makhachev taking on Dustin Poirier. Now, this was another example of a fight that actually ended up delivering, but I think overall the Islam Makhachev run at lightweight is disappointing, and it's not Islam's fault, right? Like, I'm not blaming Islam, but just overall with the Charles Oliveira pullout, the Arman Tsarukyan pullout, this Poirier matchup, he just didn't really fight like the top contender very often. Like, he only did it a couple of times. And I think this was just a result of poor planning from the UFC. This fight with Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier took place at UFC 302. Prior to UFC 300, the top 3 contenders at lightweight were Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, and Arman Tsarukyan. Justin Gaethje was coming off of back-to-back wins versus Rafael Fiziev, and then that awesome KO against Dustin Poirier. Like, when you head kick KO Dustin Poirier out cold, that is a title shot right there. Arman Tsarukyan was on a 3-fight win streak, his signature win being a KO against Beneil Dariush, and then Oliveira, after losing the belt, he also had a KO win against Beneil. So you could have made the argument that any of those 3 were deserving of a title shot. So what does the UFC do? If Islam Makhachev is going to fight at 302, you would think one of those guys would be in the mix. No, the UFC decides to book all 3 of those guys at UFC 300 when they should know that Islam Makhachev is planning to fight at UFC 302. What happens? Gaethje gets knocked out by Max Holloway. Charles Oliveira loses to Arman Tsarukyan. Arman, rightfully so, doesn't want to turn around in a month and a half for the biggest fight of his life and a title shot at UFC 302. So they have to give the opportunity to Dustin Poirier, who was on a 1-fight win streak, a KO win against Benoit Saint-Denis, who was outside of the top 10. So this one, I guess when they're actually booking the fight, right? Potentially they chose the best dude. Obviously you can't do Gaethje or Oliveira after they lost. If Arman says no, he says no. So they can say, oh, no one else was available, we went with Dustin. But similar to some of the other ones I've been talking about, it's just poor planning, where if you have 3 top contenders, why on earth are you having them all fight a month to 2 months before their potential next fight? It just didn't make any sense. And once again, like I said, 3 of the Islam title wins or title fights were just not against the top contenders, right? The Moicano fight, the second Volk one, and then the Poirier one. We didn't get to see him fight Gaethje, coming off that Poirier loss or the Poirier win. We didn't get to see him fight Arman coming off the Charles win. We're not going to see him get to fight Ilia Topuria. So overall, just kind of disappointing here with how the run went. And, some of that is not on the UFC, like the 2 pullouts, that's not their fault. This one, I do put the blame on them for. And then we have probably the most egregious example in this video, the title fight between Sean O'Malley and Chito Vera. I think I already mentioned this, but the UFC already skyrocketed Sean O'Malley into the title opportunity. I don't think Sean O'Malley had a single ranked win before he got booked against Petr Yan. He wins a very questionable, very close decision, immediately gets thrown into a title shot against Aljamain Sterling. Now, shout out to him. Also, made Aljo fight on short notice for that fight after giving Sean O'Malley a very long layoff. But shout out to O'Malley, had a great performance, gets the KO win. So who does the UFC give the opportunity to? You have Chito Vera on a 1-fight win streak against the number 10 ranked guy, Pedro Munoz. Doesn't seem like a super deserving option. You have Merab on a 9-fight win streak with back-to-back wins against Petr Yan and Jose Aldo. The most dominant we've ever seen Petr Yan get beaten. by Merab. And then also had to pick up another win against Henry Cejudo, where they didn't even let him sit on his spot. We've seen them let dudes sit on their spot when they're undeserving, like we saw with Sean Strickland. Merab was already deserving and had to fight for that opportunity against Henry Cejudo, which he won a month before the Cheeto O'Malley title fight. And then you also had Corey Sandhagen on a 3-fight win streak with wins against Rob Font, which he took on short notice, after accepting a fight against Umar that he did not need to do. He had a win against Cheeto Vera. He also had a win against Song Yadong. So you have two pretty deserving contenders. You have Cheeto, who is not even close to deserving. They give the opportunity to Cheeto Vera. Obviously, because of the history between the two, right? Sean O'Malley's only loss was to Cheeto. Stylistically, it was a friendly fight for O'Malley because he wasn't going to get wrestled, was going to be able to strike. So it's clear why they set it up. They've consistently done like everything in their power to really, really push Sean O'Malley, but obviously is an example of a very, very undeserved title shot and probably the most egregious one on here. And then the last one I will leave you guys with, this is December 2023. So this is where I'm cutting it. The Leon Edwards-Colby Covington fight. Just to kind of give you the timeline here, Colby Covington lost to Kamaru Usman in their rematch in November of 2021. His next fight was March of 2022, so decently quick turnaround there, and he beats Jorge Masvidal in a 5-round fight. Not a super entertaining performance, but a clean win for Colby in that rivalry. Then he has the whole legal situation with Masvidal, and so he wasn't fighting. He was out for a year and a half. And after a 1-fight win streak against someone who I don't think was really in the title picture, the UFC decides to gift him with a title shot against Leon Edwards. He had 1 win in the last 2.5 years, and shockingly, it was an uncompetitive fight. It was boring. It was not entertaining. Colby didn't show up, so they did all these things to give this guy this opportunity, and he didn't even push a pace, didn't fight a fun fight. And then it seemed like they were doing all of this to avoid giving Bilal the title shot. Then what happens next? Bilal takes the title off of Leon Edwards. Another one of these examples of trying to wait to do something. Same thing with the O'Malley Cheeto one, right? It was like they were praying for Merab to lose to Cejudo. Merab wins and he still ends up taking the title. So just a lot of examples of pretty rough title fights being made in the last couple of years here. It's disappointing, especially when none of these really ever pay off. Maybe you can say the Makhachev-Poirier one paid off, or the Pereira Roundtree, but they kind of just end up delaying the inevitable, and you got dudes sitting around. There are sometimes allowing dudes to kind of wait in a line when they're not deserving. Other times you have a bunch of deserving dudes and you're all pushing them to fight like we saw at UFC 300. So just not a great stretch here for the UFC. I will say if Yair Rodriguez gets that rematch against Volkanovski, that would probably skyrocket to the most insane one in this whole video. Maybe it's still Cheeto, but man, that would just be so bad. And I'm not even a Movsar fan. I probably rooted against him in every single fight I've seen him have in the UFC, and I still would think he's just getting absolutely hosed here. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Hit the like button, subscribe if you enjoyed. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next one.